Thank you so much, Jessica. Good morning, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about how you can use open source intelligence to support your network defense, moving from reactive to proactive. So let's do a quick overview. When you think of network defense, you often think of doing things like assessing indicator risk, adding context, evaluating connections, trying to accelerate your triage so that you can identify the things that are critical faster, and also trying to really capture and preserve the context so that you can build repeatable process around it. Now, when you start to look inside the network, you often forget what goes on outside the network. Open source intelligence is really critical, and there is a lot of good information that happens outside of what you see in your network for network defense. Now, if we're at Sans OSINT, I'm sure you guys are learning all about that, but just a quick refresher, some of the places you can look to learn about data that you can actually use for defense. You can monitor news reports, you can identify different patterns to when you read about your APTs and threats, threat publications that you may see put out by a lot of the major research firms or security vendors. You can start to build TTP profiles of different threats, and you can also track registrations and new infrastructure creation as it is spun up on the internet. You can also build profiles and collections for external monitoring so that you can find the things that are relevant to you more quickly. And you can then take the information you find, extract out relevant indicators, patterns, attack types, and use that to enhance your defense internally. So how do you actually do OSINT effectively? Well, you have to really understand where your organization sits so that you can target your research. There is a lot out there, so you want to make sure that you look at your assets and their value. What does your organization do that would motivate threat actors to come after you, to access your data, harm your assets, to do harm to your clients or supply chain? And once you know what would motivate threat actors, you can then identify what methods they're likely to use and which actors are likely to target your organization so that you can plan against it. Now, as part of the general network defense activities that I hope you engage in, you should be making sure to map your attack surface, analyzing it in terms of the methods that may be deployed against it so you can proactively close those holes. But, doing that once isn't enough. One of the things that you always want to do is to establish external open source intelligence monitoring efforts so that you can find information about the most likely attackers and avenues for compromise that are relevant to your organization, and then constantly monitor these adversaries, their activities, their interests, different campaigns that they're spinning up, and map those areas of interest and focus to your changing business activities. You may not have been an interesting target yesterday, but suddenly you sign a new contract with a new client, and because threat actors are targeting that client, you may be appealing as a target today. So that's something you always want to keep in mind. And of course, being an analyst, you always want to form hypotheses. You need to keep thinking about new ways that actors could come after you. What do you expect to see so that you can constantly update your monitoring and collections and stay ahead of the curve? Now, building a process for this is really important. This shouldn't be something that you do once and forget. This has to be a repeatable cycle. You always want to do your prep up front. We talked about understanding the threat profile, identifying relevant attackers, and then you want to make sure that when you take a look at establishing your collections, you monitor all of those key terms, all of the actors, any TTPs you find, and as you identify new patterns, be they observations of patterns or behaviors in your own network, you're changing infrastructure or changing business priorities, you then update your collections, leveraging the OSINT research that you do to close the loop in your internal detections. You always want to document your gaps. You want to update to account for new patterns or new TTPs. And you also want to devise new alerts and analytics based on what you see inside and outside of the network to more effectively detect and block relevant malicious infrastructure before it touches your network. So you're not stuck doing remediations because you caught it up front. A lot of this means you have to understand what's relevant. You need to identify threat actors and their motivations, as we talked about before. That means you've got to look at state-aligned actors, those sexy APTs that everyone talks about, what they're doing in different critical sectors. Are they trying to disrupt confidence? What are the national priorities of those state actors that may cause them to target you over someone else? Are they going after individual information? Are they looking for leverage? Are there people within a network who may make a good lure for a phishing campaign? If they can target you, they may be able to get to your contacts. Or they may just be after patents and trade secrets looking to pull out data, or a lot of them may also want to make money, especially the North Koreans. And along those lines, you'll also have to worry about cyber criminals. Are they interested in credential theft, business email compromise, identity theft, or blackmail? And then, of course, you've got your hacktivists. Figure out, if there are ideologically relevant sectors or functions or events that might cause them to come after your organization. And once you have a sense of who the threat actor groups are, you want to make sure that you map them to the ways in which they attack your organization. Look at the MITRE attack matrix. Make sure that you read threat actor analysis and reporting. Look at Yara rules for how their malware executes. For example, China's Deep Panda has impersonated corporate domains or entities who had a business relationship so that they could launch initial compromise. This is a really often used pattern. If you look at SolarWinds, they went through the supply chain in order to compromise their targets. And that's something that we always need to be prepared for. So it's not just about understanding your organization, it's also about understanding everything about it, including your partners, vendors, clients, platforms and systems that you run, your digital footprint, your access policies. And then you want to make sure that all of those things are tracked against methods of compromise. So you're aware of social engineering techniques, favored attack types, or specific malware deployed and vulnerabilities exploited. And you want to make sure that you're monitoring your collections for all of these key terms. And then conducting manual searches as well, so that you can be sure to find the most relevant information if your collections aren't necessarily pulling in new attacks, because you obviously won't know about them until you do manual monitoring to add those terms to your OSINT collections. So it's that constant cycle. And just as a heads up, when you're looking for sources, when you're looking for things to pull in with regard to open source information, look for things like software update alerts, newsworthy topics, big events that are upcoming, any announcements from your partners or vendors, of course, your internal tools and sites, but also attacks targeting organizations within your vertical or within your sector, so that you can identify the ongoing trends and thus the likely avenues for attack. And it's really, again, emphasizing that constant vigilance. You want to track your known breaches, your threat actor reports, your news and events, but you also want to constantly reconsider how your organization and what it does make it an appealing target. Any changes in assets or relationships, anytime you adopt a new technology or start working with a new partner, if you spin up a new internal login portal, these are all things that you'll want to use to update your collection so that you're sure you're monitoring your entire attack surface. And now it's great to talk about, open source intelligence, but you can really extract a lot of value from it in terms of making it actionable and applicable to network defense. So once you're monitoring for relevant information, the next trick is to identify the infrastructure, the IOCs that could be used to actually target your organization. And then you want to track and map those connections to create an overall picture of attacks and campaigns. Look for common elements that could connect malicious infrastructure, and then expand that, pivot through to identify as many indicators as possible. Once you do that, you'll want to examine all of your research, the articles, the reports, the indicators that you've collected, to predict how the information that you may find could surface within your network or within infrastructure that's being spun up to target you. And then once you know that and you have your hypothesis, you want to take action on it. So once you identify any indicators that pose a threat, you want to package the data and deliver it to your internal teams, to your firewall, to your detection systems, or initiate takedown of anything you find external to your organization. And it really is all in the follow through. So monitoring, connecting, analyzing, and mapping. don't forget that secure component, so that you interface with the people who are actually doing your tech ops or your network security. A lot of times, the people who are doing patches may get left out of the information loop. So you have to make sure that you distribute this information well across your organization. And then ultimately, you use it to improve your detections, your automations, and your processes so that you can better recognize those future threats and potential attacks. So what does the pattern look like? Here, you can see that there is clearly a pattern of attackers, scammers, creating phishing attacks and scams that impersonate government agencies. I wanted to give you guys an example today, pulled from the real world, but I also didn't want to pick on a specific company. So we're going to be looking at threats that are impersonating the Department of Homeland Security and other major federal agencies. So as you can see, there's a history. We talk about it in January of this year. We see it in 2019. We see it way far back, to the early 2010s. This is nothing new. So look at the recent events and historical events to identify patterns. And then you can start to form a hypothesis. Well, if something similar happened before, it's probably happening now, right? And then you can use that hypothesis with the details you've gathered from the reporting you found to look externally for infrastructure indicators that match, say, domain registration patterns, hosting patterns. And you can then examine the connections, data, and content, assess the risk, and package it for defense. And today I'm going to show you a demo of how we can actually do that leveraging the Domain Tools platform. I know that this is something that a lot of people do by hand. When I started out as a threat intelligence analyst, I did all of this outside of a platform on the open web, manually hopping from site to site, and it was painful. Nowadays, we don't exactly have to do that. Platforms like Iris and many other OSINT investigation tools make it really easy to identify data and pivot through it that's collected from the open web. So how would you do this? You're going to start a new investigation, and you are going to do an advanced search. Click that little button right at the top, and it'll show you an advanced search pane. Here you can select any parameter to pick what you might want to look for. Since we're looking for attacks that target government sites or agencies, we're going to say domain as one of the indicators. We're going to say a domain might contain, and we're going to say -gov. So yeah, a domain could contain -gov. There's probably lots of that. So we're going to narrow our search a little bit. We're going to look only since the start of the year. We're just about a month and a half into it, so we should have some good findings. And I'm going to run that search. Now, you can see that there are a ton of results, and there's a lot of data that comes back when you look at a search. You've got your hosting information, your email information, domain information, contacts, registrants. You've got registrar status and expiration date, name server data, any AdSense, Alexa, or Google Analytics codes that may appear, website responses, redirect information, MX information, as well as SPF information and SSL cert information. All things you might want to look at when you are examining a results set. This makes pivoting really easy. But with all of that stuff, how do you narrow down? Well, you can sort of triage your results. You can sort by key indicators. The things I like to sort through are risk score, that helps assess the risk of the domain, and the create date. You can immediately, escalate anything that's got a risk score of 100. That means it has been validated and found in an industry block list. So that is a known threat, and it's known malicious. But when you want to filter down and see what might not yet be caught, I recommend adding a filter for risk scores of 70 or greater. You can also consider removing anything that's been 100 because it's already tagged and reported. It's not new. You can send those off and be done with them. And that helps you filter down a large result set. Or if you found other information or indicators in your OSINT searches, you can continue to construct either and or statements to expand or narrow your search. So let's sort by risk score. You can see here, these are all the things that are 100. So you can push those for blocking or defense. Let's sort by create date. Now, this means there's stuff that's been registered just yesterday. I ran the search yesterday, so that is what we found. And if you start to scroll down within your results set to see the most recent information, because in theory, doing your OSINT research is constant, and you can set up monitors, so the most relevant information is likely what you want to find. we scroll down a bit, we see that there is a site here, usss-gov.info. And that's of interest to me. It might be US Social Security, it might be US Secret Service that they're trying to target, but now I'm intrigued. So I'm going to look a little bit further here. We're going to open up the inspect pane to assess this indicator. So you can see we've got the site. We see a risk score here. It is a score of 99. And here we see we are likely to have that as spams. There's the threat profile assessment. And there's a lot of other detail on this initial page. You can look at PDNS traffic. This is your domain profile view. And you can see also along the top, there's lots of other tabs here. So you can also look at current domain attributes, screenshot history, who is history, hosting history, or SSL profile details to get a sense of what you're seeing associated with this domain. This also helps you dive a little deeper into the domain profile. So we talked about assessing risk. This guy had that 99 spam score, and you can see along the bottom, there are other components of the score that indicate this is likely to be a threat. We've got unique threat profile indicators, which are predictive indicators, saying that this domain, and because of its age, name, and infrastructure in the supporting evidence up there, is likely to be similar to other phishing, malware, or spam domains that we've seen across the internet, and therefore we're able to predict what kind of attack this is likely to be. This scores highly for all three. It's a brand new domain. We don't have a lot of data indicating that it's one attack type over another, but those scores will dynamically update as we get more information and as this domain is actually operationalized. One of the other things to note is the proximity score. That's treated a little differently. Whereas the others are predictive indicators of threats, proximity is more of a trailing indicator. It looks at all of the known malicious infrastructure connected to a domain based on different pivot points and how many hops away a domain is from known badness. So it might be in the neighborhood of really bad things. And that's a good way to identify when something might be, say, co-hosted with a lot of known threats as well. So you've got the predictive and also scores reflective of the actual infrastructure associations. So when you want to look a little bit further, tying these infrastructure associations is going to be critical. You can filter your searches based on established attack patterns and relevant attributes. You can find pivot points and commonalities to identify other connected domains or IPs, or if you're looking to do additional OSINT investigation later outside of the platform, any names, email addresses, phone numbers, or physical addresses that you might be able to search on. And you can then start to build a profile of your attacker, pulling out common attributes and TTPs so that you have an advanced search you can continue to run. And I'll show you how to do that. So here you can see the site has 5 guided pivots in this little yellow box. That means that there are 5 assets or 5 attributes associated with this site that are associated with other sites as well. I like to call these guided pivots Goldilocks pivots, just the right size, not too big, not too small. For example, if you share an IP address with 1,000, 2,000 domains, well, it's not going to tell you much. It's likely publicly hosted infrastructure, so it's not relevant. So we like to right size it just when there's enough data that it's likely to be directly associated to the actor you're looking for. So here we're going to look at the email address. As you can see, this email address is associated with a DNS or a SOA record. It's true that privacy for whois means you're less likely to see some of that whois associated information. But oftentimes threat actors forget that their DNS and SOA emails may also be visible and used for pivoting. So we're going to take a quick peek by right-clicking on that. And you're going to see that there are 2 other domains associated with this value and that the other one likely has a high risk score. Let's click on the magnifying glass and see what it is. All right, so we've got uba-grps.com and homelandsec-us.com, both with high risk scores. Okay, that means this is likely targeting the Secret Service if they're looking at Homeland Security as well, and it means that this domain is one of those that fits my hypothesis. So I'm going to now create a new search, and that's going to show me a search based on the domains that were in that pivot. So we've got that Homeland Sec US, the UBA GRPS, and my original USS Gov info. And now we can look a little further. Whereas USS GovInfo had 4 guided pivots, Homeland Sec-US has 8. And so I'm going to take a look at these. You can see we've got contact information here. Someone's using an alias. This domain's only 14 days old, so that information is pretty new. And you can identify the guided pivots because they're all highlighted in blue. And clicking will take you from guided pivot to guided pivot. Here, we're going to look at the host name. This is a host name that exists across all of these domains in various similar patterns. We've got Earth, Mars, and Mercury, and Venus. So it's interesting. Let's right-click on it, and we see there are 88 domains that actually share just this Earth value with an average risk score of 79. That, to me, is interesting. So let's take a look to see what we've got. When we open this up, I'm seeing a lot of credit group phishing, government phishing, banking phishing. We see targeting for the Federal Reserve Bank, and a couple of other interesting sites like Homeland Security-USA. So you're starting to see a pattern here for the kinds of things that this attacker targets. They're obviously going after financial institutions, but they are also looking to impersonate government services. So you can see TD Bank for Canada, so the US and Canada as well. And if you scroll down, you see a whole lot more that are likely to be relevant. I can see the IMF in here. So looking at this, what we want to do is to look at all of the guided pivots that are available for connected infrastructure. You can start the new search like I did previously to only look at items based on your pivot, or you can actually expand your search, which I'm going to do here, to bring in all of these domains into my current investigation. Now, if I didn't want to do that, I wanted to exclude things, I could select certain items here and narrow my investigation to exclude them, or actually exclude them, or sorry, narrow my investigation to focus only on them, or exclude them from my investigation as well. So here I'm going to expand to bring it in, and you can see that when I do expand my investigation, it updates the advanced search parameter on the side to bring in the indicator on which I pivoted. So I've got that little infrastructure attribute now as part of my search. So I'm pulling in anything that was associated with my first pivot, the starting domain, and my second pivot. And now I've got 88 records here. All right, the heck do I do with 88 records? That's quite a bit of information. And I don't want to sort through it manually like I used to have to do. It'd take forever. So we're going to look at a couple of different ways to find similarities. The first is going to be taking a peek at the stats pane. So here you can see that for every field in the pivot engine that's likely to have connections, you can see that you've got guided pivots highlighted in blue. So any of these words or attributes, you've got the phone number, contact names, create dates, things like that, commonalities. Are highlighted both for guided pivots, but also for the count or how many times they appear within your result set. If something only appears within your result set once, but has a guided pivot associated with it, well, that means that there are more domains that you could pull in that you haven't found yet that are still associated with your threat actor. Now, some of these indicators here may be reused. I see Allison Williams or Marion Baker. Yeah, those probably aren't great indicators, even though it's indicating a Goldilocks size pivot. So you do have to use a little bit of your thought process here. But you can always right click. So I'm going to right click on Jack Mold. I'm going to do that preview again, and I'm going to see if the domains that are associated with Jack Mold fit my hypothesis and this attacker's sort of MO for targeting banks or government organizations. And here we do see that they do. We've got Zenith, Wells Fargo, and Fed Reserve Bank, as well as a presidential committee that it looks like they're targeting. So I'm going to expand my investigation to bring those domains in, and that means I'll capture them. Going to look at a couple of the more relevant items in here if you're looking to do OSINT and pivot outside the platform later. We've got a couple of email addresses that are in fact valid, that appear once in your result set, so you can pivot on them to bring in more data, or use them as indicators to search, and you can also use them to build your profile. You also have in theory, SSL certs if you're lucky enough to find them, and you may be able to pivot on your SSL subject, on an SSL hash, or on an SSL organization. And this is one way that you can view the data, identify new pivots, and figure out what you haven't yet covered. Another good way to take a look at your data to understand the connections and what are your most commonly used attributes is to look at the visualization pane. So for visualization, you open up that tab and you can see a couple of different things here. Any of the blue dots are domains, and those domains are clustered based on size. But we've also identified IPs that are connected to multiples, as well as the name servers. And we wanted to look at name servers because that's the first pivot that we use to sort of find our first set of connected infrastructure. You know, that Mars, Venus, Earth sort of nomenclature seems to be very specific to them. So looking at this, you can see that almost all of the domains we found, because we pivoted on them to get there, are clustered around 4 domains. Now, the IPs associated with it, you've got a couple of shared IPs, but if you click into any of these dots, you can see how many other infrastructure components are associated with them. They're all public hosting, so it's not really useful. But you can add any attribute that you want from the pivot engine. So you can just click a little plus sign and select from this drop-down list any other attribute you might want to cluster on. Here, I'm going to cluster on email address. And you can see there's a couple of emails that are tied to multiple domains. You can see that with the wires. If you click on any single dot, all of the associated points will be highlighted in white. If you double click on it, it'll go red. But basically, that helps you identify what's common. Now, unfortunately, this one is privacy protection services email, so it's not that useful. But as you saw, there were plenty of others that were from our stats pane view. So this is just another good way to view connections, move things around, and dig into interesting data points that you might not have seen otherwise. Going back to the stats pane, what you want to be able to do now is to drag and drop a lot of those indicators that we saw right into your advanced search pane. You can actually take any attribute, you can click on it to see what's connected, you can validate those connected domains and say, yes, these fit my profile, so it's likely to be relevant to this attacker's MO. And you can drag and drop those email addresses, those IP addresses if they're relevant, any registration names, name servers, right into your advanced search to really build a full profile. Use and statements or to narrow, or statements to expand. And this will actually help you create a set of reusable attributes and patterns that you can begin to monitor for. And also consider whether historical results are valuable. You can toggle on and off the little historical green trigger to say you want to look at things that are older for, say, past whois records, or maybe just the newest stuff. Now, I've done that for this set of infrastructure, and we have a really long advanced search that has a bunch of parameters: emails, registrant orgs, name servers, contact phones, things that are likely to be reused. And in bringing those in right now, we've got 99 records, since those are all been, they've all been expanded for the search results. So there's more than we had before, but we always can tell that these guys are doing things that are relatively recent. So we want to continue looking and setting up monitors, because you want to search for those key terms, pivot to identify the elements, map the connections, and then you want to make sure that you're assessing the risk. And once you know they're relevant, you want to continue to take this information and deliver it into your organization so that it's actionable. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. In making sure that you deliver these indicators that pose a threat, you can think of your audience. You can annotate your investigation to add interesting findings for each investigation node and actually share your investigation completely with other members of the team. You can tag infrastructure for tracking, and you can also use a search hash, not just to share your results, but also to set up regular monitoring. You can rerun that search hash with a new filter to exclude previously tagged domains so you only see what's new, or you can add a create date filter to identify new registrations that fit the pattern. And then you can take all of this data and export it, depending on your audience, into other systems or platforms. Or you can share the data for third-party takedown. You can copy domain lists. You can do a full export of all of the details in the pivot engine into a CSV. You can pop it into Stix.txt or Stix.json, or you can actually deliver a full investigation PDF report. Here, you can see that we have a progress set of each decision we've made during our investigation when you look at those nodes at the top. And you can actually highlight any node with particularly interesting information and add notes on it, so that when you share the investigation with your colleagues or with other researchers, they can see what you found interesting and why. You can, as I mentioned, export your entire search. It'll get all those nodes, it'll get all the steps you took, and all of your results set. And then all you got to do is use the import box below if you wanted to load that in again or have another colleague load it in. So someone can leverage or continue to monitor based on all of the work that you've already done. You can also tag these domains. You can click the checkbox to select all, just select a couple, and you can add specific tags. You can custom create them and they're shareable within your organization. And those are things that you can also filter on. So in your advanced search, you can do tag, search by tag, tag does include, tag does not include, tag matches, so that you can create dynamic searches and monitoring based on your own historical work and tags you've added. And of course, you can also download to CSV, StixJSON, or StixTaxi if you need. One of the other things I mentioned is you can generate that entire investigation report. It is a PDF. It tracks all of the details, all of the indicators, all of the attributes, and all of the steps that you took to step through. So if you need to justify how you got to a particular set of information, what pivots you made in order to find the critical threat actor information, how you got from A to B, this investigation report will document that for you based on your actions in the platform. Now, we talked a lot about how to use this for network defense. But you can go beyond just network defense. You can surface pivots for attribution. This demo covers OSINT for the network defense use case, but all of the data from the stats pane, especially those indicators like names, emails, phone numbers, or addresses, can be used for research outside of the platform as well. You can export any of those to help you identify additional connection points associated with these things that might be found, say, on social media platforms. Email addresses are great for that. And ultimately help you attribute this activity to the threat actor you're tracking, maybe even being able to actually identify the person behind the attacks. For OSINT research, that's often one of the goals for those who aren't focused on the network defense use case. So it's still useful there. And as we reach the end of the presentation, just a couple of quick reminders for takeaways. Use risk scores and domain profile information to quickly triage and hone in on relevant infrastructure so that you can see threats at the time at which they're created. Then identify connected infrastructure using the stats pane and visualization pane to look for patterns so you know what attributes are commonly used, reused, and also where to look to pull in additional connections that you might not have found. Build that advanced search pane based on the TTPs that you find, based on the MO indicators, and use that to monitor for new infrastructure fitting that profile, using either create data as a filter or by tagging and searching to exclude things you've previously tagged so you only see what's new. And then proactively block or issue takedowns for any of these indicators that you see out in the wild before they appear on your network. And that is just a quick summary of how you can look outside your network with OSINT to help protect it. Thank you very much. Any questions?
All right. Thank you so much, Jackie, for that great presentation. We do have a couple questions as they're coming in from the Slack channel and also here on Zoom. The
Great.
first, yes, that is great. The first question is, could you speak a bit about how domain tools calculate scores since they seem to be the key data point to drive your investigation?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, there's 4 components for scoring. You've got your threat profile scores, which are the phishing, malware, and spam scores. Those are actually identified via machine learning. So Domain Tools has been out on the internet collecting data, monitoring threats for the last 20 years. We have 20 years worth of history of registration data, and we've used that to identify patterns. So we know what are the kinds of attributes or indicators that may indicate a domain will be used for phishing? These are all predictive. Does it have a certain pattern in the name? Is the hosting infrastructure something we likely see used in phishing attacks? Or is it something we're more likely to see used in malware attacks? And we take that information that we see for validated threats and we use it to train our models constantly. We update our models every single day. We sort of rerun them, recalculate them so that we can identify what we believe to be a solid predictor of threat in any of those categories. And each of those models are independent. So we train for phishing, malware, and spam completely separately, which is why you're likely to see differing scores across the categories depending on all of the attributes at the time of registration or at the time you're looking at domain. Oftentimes the infrastructure or something will change as something's operationalized, and we take those into account as well, updating our threat profile every single day and intraday as well, for the 2.5 years after a domain is initially created. The proximity score, based on all of those infrastructure connections, is also updated daily. And that's based on the changing associations around a given domain. So if you've got that proximity score and it's co-located, say, on an IP that has a really high percentage of verified threats, well, then that's going to have a really high proximity score. So we look at how many hops away a domain is from other validated threats and what's the concentration of those threats tied in. And it's not just, the IP. We look at the registrant email. We look at all of those other attributes that might indicate that the person who registered this domain is either has been caught before doing something shady or is co-located with a lot of other high-risk activity that is validated. So that's how we look at the different scores. And you look at the overall score, which is the highest of any of the four at any given time. Hopefully that was able to answer a couple of your questions. I do have some additional materials on it, got some details on the website I can also point to you to if you want some more information.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Jackie. Next question that we have in the Slack channel is it possible to simulate curl requests to potentially malicious domains in the Iris platform?
So that we don't do. We are just delivering information that we have collected. It is something that you can obviously do outside the platform, but it's not something that we have as native functionality. However, it is a really good idea, and it's something that we can certainly look at adding to the roadmap.
All right, great. Thank you. Next question is there a way we can search for domains similar to target legitimate domain, which might be nearly similar, typo squatted directly via domain tools?
Yes. So that is actually a product that we have called Fisheye. And what Fisheye does is if you give it a core term, it'll do all of the fuzzing for you. So it'll create that fuzz list of terms, and you'll be able to get a list of all of the domains that match those fuzz terms and also get monitored alerts for those fuzz terms going forward. So if you want to look for variants on your organization name, subbing in a 0 for an O, we got you covered. And then from the Fisheye platform and UI, you can actually just take any of those selected domains and kick them into Iris for further investigation. So you can just bring all of those monitors in and you can start digging through them and pivoting through them just like we did today.
Great, thank you. Next question is can domain tools be used for identifying parked domains?
So we do have a domain status active or statuses that we pull from any of the sites we get. So, you've got something that is just purchased but isn't yet live, not yet operationalized and being used, and you can see that in the domain profile. It is also something that you may be able to see through screenshots, since we do screenshot our domains, and you can obviously see when something is a parking page through those screenshots as soon as we get something live to screenshot. So that's another way that you can help identify that. And you can actually see in the screenshot history when something has switched over from parked to live.
All right, great, thank you. Another question that we have from Slack is are there use cases where bad guys can make use of tools like domain tools to their advantage?
Tools like domain tools, absolutely. I'm proud to say that we actually do vet our customers and we try very hard to keep the capabilities we have out of the hands of threat actors. However, there are plenty of other platforms that are open to the community where threat actors can just as easily use this information for OSINT targeting, for research. We hope that those things are being used for red teaming. We know they're not, well, they are, but it's not the only use case, unfortunately. So that is something that people have to be very, very careful about. That's why we take vetting our users very, very seriously, and that's why it is a closed platform. But yeah, you can absolutely use this for red teaming or attacks in terms of the capabilities, and any of the, well, almost all of the capabilities that I demonstrated here from a pivoting perspective can be attempted manually out on the open internet with free tools. I mean, that's what we all used to do before we had platforms like this. Those same techniques are obviously applicable for threat actors who are looking to do their due diligence. We're able to hopefully get there a little bit faster with the use of these platforms and tools, but that's why we have to be really careful about understanding who's likely to target us so we know what to defend against. And that's one of the reasons why OSINT is so important.
All right, thank you. We do have a quick question. An audience member was asking what the name of the tool was again.
Oh, sorry, your volume just got out. Can you say that once more? What the name of the
Of the tool is?
So this is Domain Tools Iris investigation platform. And the other tool that I mentioned earlier for finding fuzz name variants and monitoring for those is called Fisheye.
All right, great, thank you. Another question is, do past indicators of compromise IOCs help inform present analysis and threat models?
They absolutely should, and they certainly do, at least from training models. One of the things to note is, an IOC may, of course, be sinkholed. The parameters around it may change. It's important to note that something was a threat at one point in time and to get the characteristics associated with it. We do that, and then that's how we help to build and improve our models constantly, by identifying new threats, validating them, and making sure that those characteristics are fed in to our training models. And when you're doing your own research, you should always look at those past indicators of compromised domain names, IPs, anything you can really find on how a threat actor has structured their attack, has made their initial forays into your network, and then you should be able to use that internally within your network or within your searches for defense. I mean, obviously, I've seen the -gov set up in other attacks successfully before. That's how I know to search for it again to see what other kinds of attacks might be using that exact same kind of construction. It's a simple example, but a really relevant one.
All right, great, thank you. Next question is, are there use cases where bad guys can make use of tools like domain tools to their advantage?
Yep, and I definitely did talk a little bit about that in an answer to a previous similar question. But anytime you are able to identify attributes associated with infrastructure, you're able to identify owners of particular infrastructure, or you're able to do research on anyone who you might be targeting out in the broader digital ecosystem, um, that's going to be a potential possibility. We do, as I mentioned, monitor very carefully for those individuals who may be trying to use our network for nefarious purposes. We have abuse monitoring in addition to our strict upfront vetting. But there's lots of sources of data out there. It's one of the things that makes open source information so powerful, that you can get it out on the open internet, and attackers can leverage that to do due diligence. It's one of the best things that they can do to start creating spear phishing attacks. We talked about domain infrastructure, but you can just as easily analyze social networks as well, and you don't need any platform to do that work.
All right, great, thank you. We have time for one more question. This is another one from the Slack channel. It mentions, can we set up alerts for new registered domains?
Yes. Uh, there are a couple of different ways to do that. As I mentioned, if you want to look for domains that are associated with your brand or fuzzed variants of any word you're searching on, the Fisheye product can do that for you. We also have a full set of monitoring capabilities, things like brand monitor, domain monitor, IP monitors. Then we call those our classic tools. You can do that via API, or you can also get that information just sent to your email inbox if you want to configure your alerts so that you can constantly monitor any of the interesting attributes that you might find while pivoting around.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jackie. So that's all the time that we do have for today. Thank you for that great presentation, and to Domain Tools for sponsoring this webcast, which helps brings this